Welcome to the Catholic Leadership Network podcast, helping ministry leaders succeed from the beginning, with your co-hosts, Christy and Sarah Jarzembowski.
All right, here we go. Welcome, everyone. This is the Catholic Leadership Network podcast. With your hosts, Christy and Sarah Jarzembowski. We are here to support ministry leaders from the very beginning. We talk about all the things no one told you about working in the church. We hope you find a grounded place to meet colleagues and get encouragement. We are so glad you are here. Today we are with Denise Utter. She's a speaker, a coach, a writer, author of Engage Every Family, a parish guide to integrated faith formation. She works with church leaders at the diocesan and parish level, exploring new approaches to faith formation that promise to encourage, empower, and equip parents and invigorate faith communities. Her other publications include articles for Catechetical Leader, Catechist Magazine, Take Out Our Faith on the Go from OSV, and Vibrant Faith's Online Catalyst. She has written online curriculum for our Sunday Visitor, Center for Ministry Development, and the Archdiocese of Chicago. She has over 30 years of experience in the field of education and ministry, having a BS in education and a master's degree in pastoral studies from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. Denise is currently working with Lifelong Faith Associates on a multi-year project that focuses on faith for a lifetime. It's designed to help churches become communities of lifelong learning and faith formation. She's working with Vibrant Faith on a new Lilly Grant project called Fourth Soil Parenting. The premise being that parenting is primarily a spiritual adventure. It has an impact on both the parents' relationship with God and their children's relationship with God. This is an exciting project. I'm so excited to have you here, Denise. Denise lives in Chicago with her husband, Rob, and they have 3 children, adult children, and this year became grandparents to a beautiful baby boy. Denise, we are so glad that you are here.
I'm so glad to be with you guys. Yes.
It's so funny because I've known you for years. I know you're like so involved in things, but it's always interesting to see somebody's bio and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know her. Right? Like, that's so exciting.
Well, and you're reading all this and I'm like, gosh, like that's all the stuff, and you just get embarrassed. Like, people keep reading and you're like, yeah, it's over 30 years. Then you say 30 years and you're like, yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, and you've been talking about family faith formation really before it became in vogue, and in style or whatever.
2004.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
it was John Roberto came and presented in our diocese in 2004, and
wow,
I was immediately hooked. I'm like, that's what's missing.
Yeah. Hashtag listeners, go back and listen to the John Roberto.
Yes, I listened to that. He's so good. He's just come on, people,
Yeah. Well, and I remember just starting out in ministry as a young youth minister thinking, how do I talk to parents? I mean, I'm still not a parent, and that's really where my biggest angst comes in, is not being a parent, yet doing a ministry with parents and intergenerational, and they have experiences that I do not have, so that has always been like a place of angst for me. And I remember hearing you talk about family and doing family faith formation and thinking, there's no way I could do that.
And it's so funny because I came into it, I had been in education, primarily high school and then junior high, with kids who had some special needs, behaviors, emotional. And I felt it was so important to work with the parents because they needed to be affirmed to be able to make any impact on what we were doing at school. And I think that, it's funny when you get to a place and, my pastor offered me this job and I was like, no. I came in for a teaching job. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, and then you look back and see all these different ways God molded you. But for me, it's always been about the parents. When I started in family faith, it was because there was such an us and them pull in in religious education. It's like, well, they don't know the faith and they can't this. I'm like, whose fault is that? Like, if we just sit with parents and build relationships, and it's not easy. And like, I was a youth minister. It's definitely not easy when you're talking teenagers, because parents are in an entirely different stage. But yeah, if we can build those relationships early, huge transformation happens. I believe that.
Can I say this, Denise, though? I was reading the intro to your newest book, and that I had a sense that you are picking this up from your family of origin and what your experiences there were. And for me, that was also like, I didn't experience catechesis in the traditional sense, but God was always present in our lives, and prayer was a big deal. And we went to church. It just varied which church that was. And so there was never a question in my mind, is God real? And what Jesus said in the Bible was to be taken seriously and paid attention to, and all that sort of stuff. So can you kind of speak to that background in your own life and how that helped you come into ministry in the church?
Yeah. I think because I didn't have like, this is how we do it, step 1, 2, and 3, and you go through, that I already was coming into it with such permission to figure things out, whatever that looked like. I didn't have well, we've always done it this way kind of thing, because my parents married very young. It was in the midst of, Vatican II. My father was Catholic. My mother was not. My father was having some issues with Vatican II. He had gone through Catholic schools his whole life and had this, what do you mean we can eat meat now on some Fridays and we never could? Be like, he struggled with this whole thing. And so as I grew up with that, they had us in formation and took us out, because my dad was struggling with, what do I believe and what is the church and all of that. And in the midst of it, taught me to ask questions and taught me to seek and wonder. And I think that was such a gift, because God was still there. And my parents read Bible stories to us. They read to us stories of some kind every single night and taught us to ask those questions. There was prayer, the holiday celebrations, of course, were focused around God being Christmas and Easter. But it wasn't the usual formation. So when we moved to this little bitty Irish Catholic town and all of my friends were going to CCD, I was like, what's that? And God works funny, but I wanted to be there purely for social reasons. And that brought my parents back in, and that, became this journey of, but it was so influenced in the home that it didn't matter if I hadn't gone all those years. It was, I had formation, I had ways we celebrated, I had traditions. And I think too often now we have the situation where kids are dropped off. This is the experience they have of church. Wednesday night, religious education, a class for an hour and a half, where we're teaching them about who Jesus is and what the church is. And that's happening really well in some places. Not always in all places, but if that's the only experience they have and it's not connected at home in daily lives, it's no wonder kids are walking away by the time they make their confirmation, if they make their confirmation. Right. So many parents are like, if you've been a DRE, and I was director of parish faith formation for a dozen years, you've heard the parents that are like, just get through confirmation, then you can be done. And you're like, done. That's not the point.
Yeah.
But we've separated it so much from family, so much from the parish, so much that we've done that. That's been a church thing. And if we could somehow connect again, and that's why I call it integrated, if we could integrate what's happening at home, affirm families for what they're already doing at home, that they might not even connect to faith. They might not even think of as they teach their child. I always use, and you'll see in the book that the lesson my pastor gave me, that he affirmed parents, the way they're already sacrificing for each other and for their children, teaching each other, forgiving each other and teaching their children forgiveness, healing each other, praying for each other, loving each other. Those are all things Jesus did. And he would tell parents, you have a better chance of becoming a saint than I do, because you are doing these things every single day, and affirm them. So if you can integrate that kind of affirmation and what they're doing at home with the parish, with the faith community, and then the community at large, bam, that's huge. But we separate everything in these little silos and compartments, and then it doesn't connect for so many kids. if it's not happening at home.
Yeah. And we don't, I feel like we also don't create entry points for parents to come into our space either. So like,
Yeah.
that was something that I struggled with early in my ministry when faith formation got to be in my realm of responsibilities, was like, I saw it really clearly. It was to the point where, in the months where it was light outside, not like right now, you guys, but in those months, the parents would congregate outside the building. Like, they wouldn't dare come in. And I'm having it the place where I am right now. They hang out in the vestibule. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, come on.
Come on in.
Yeah, please be here and spend time.
Yeah.
And so in this new book, you're talking about that, like how to integrate the faith formation and bring them in and connect them. Can you give us some ways to like reimagine, or what are you hoping that folks take away from the book, really?
Yeah. One of the first things we learned when we first moved into family faith formation at the parish I was in, and like I said, I did not plan on being involved in that in any let's say paid way. I was on a committee, my pastor called. I mean, it was just one of those things that you're like, oh, here we go, God, what's this gonna look like? And all of a sudden, I had been a teacher and I had been a youth minister, and people primarily liked me. And all of a sudden I'm in this role where we're changing everything in church. Mm-hmm. And you have people coming at you. And it was an incredibly humbling experience. And at the same time, it was the first time in my life I felt like God's hand was truly on my shoulder and I was where I was supposed to be. And so thank God I had this pastor that just got it, because he's like, no, we're going to listen. We're going to listen to everybody that agrees, but everybody that disagrees. And we're going to invite everybody in for these conversations. And so we learned really quickly, like inviting parents in and then lecturing to them for like an hour and a half on what their kids were learning. That's not it. That's not it. And so as we listened to parents and really decided, as we watched them, as we turned things back and let them have a conversation about something and came back, we're like, oh, wait a minute, what's happening right there? As we broke out in large group kind of stuff, what happened right there was more important than anything we said. Mm-hmm. And then it would be again. And then when we got them to talk about their children, the energy in the room just went insane. Yeah. And I got, like, so Same. Again, like it was this thing where, what surprised you about parenting? What surprised you about becoming a parent? And the conversation, and then the things they shared. And some of it funny, like the no sleeping and the how they can push your buttons and that. But some of it really like beginning to understand, just getting a glimpse of how God must love us, because how that love just multiplies. Being so worried about when I have my second and my third, how can I love that child like this child? And your heart just expands. And so listening to this parents and beginning to see them. And then as we asked them, I remember one time when the director of the family program at the time did not want to speak about the topic of morality. It's like, how am I, who am not a parent, going to go tell parents how to? And I'm like, that's fine, I'll come in. But we took it a different direction, and Pope Francis had just become Pope. And we talked about how he was talking about mercy. And I shared a story I hadn't planned on sharing about when I was a youth minister and going to confession and all these things, just kind of going along and turning things over to the parents after I just cried about something I didn't even believe I was telling them about a confession I'd gone to, and the conversations they had. And like, we didn't ask them about confession. We didn't ask them hard questions. We always made it questions that was either focused on their children or personal experience. So like, when has it been difficult for you to pray? Was that time? And the pouring out they had for each other in those conversations probably took us further than anything we'd ever experienced in faith formation. And parents came up afterwards and said, thank you for giving us this space to struggle with faith, struggle with God, struggle with the church together with other people. We don't have anywhere to do that. Right. His father came up and said, I'm not going to do that in front of my kids. I'm not going to do that at work. I don't do that at the bar with where can I do that? Yeah. This was very important. And he had been a dad who sat back every week, like, yeah, I dare you. Trying, just trying to say something that's going to hit me. And so it was just really realizing we just needed to be vulnerable with them for them to become vulnerable. We needed to talk about faith in ways that was real life. Yeah. So that they associated what was happening with their children in the classroom, learning about faith with real life stuff, so they could make those connections. And then when you begin having them have, just conversate, one of our things was just having them practice the faith conversations they were going to have at home with each other. So every month they got like these parent pages and, here's 10 questions or stories to tell to your children or ask your children. And we'd have them just pick 2. And in the midst of picking 2, talking about it with each other, the things that they shared and learned, like, oh, that's how I could teach my kid about. Oh, that's something we could do that's easy. They learned more from each other that way than they did from us. So I think the biggest thing is affirming what they already know, what they're already doing, giving them a chance to talk to each other. And I include in the book so many ways that not our parish, I told you the way that our parish was doing, but the ways other parishes are doing it now. I think storytelling, and I haven't got a chance to listen to Timon's all the way through, but I love Timon Davis. I love her so much. And so I think storytelling is absolutely critical to engaging and integrating that from home to parish to community.
Yeah.
Because getting those parents and individuals, even if you don't work with parents, adults to share their stories is going to make a huge impact on how our faith community expresses that faith and lives that faith.
And
Yeah.
connecting
So I hope I
back to
answered that
Timon.
question.
That was great. And Timon has the my story, your story concept, starting with my story and stepping into that space of vulnerability creates a space for vulnerability. And I've been trying to step into that a little bit more with my parents and in those large group settings. So the kids know that they can be vulnerable and the parents know they can be vulnerable, and then they can start talking to each other in that safe space. And it's really been
so
fruitful.
Big.
Yeah.
It is fruitful. And like I said, I learned that the hard way, just falling into it. I was telling a story that I hadn't planned on telling and tears came and I was like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I don't tell those kind of stories in public. And the fruit was there and the Holy Spirit, just everything was, I was like, that was so powerful. I need to just break down that wall that I built up when everybody was like, not wanting to change. There was a wall that went up and I'm like, you don't need to know me. You don't need to know my family. I'm just going to be the person who teaches.
But
and
I think and it's important for them to know that we have bad days.
Yes.
I had a bad day yesterday and I had little ones for first reconciliation. And the very first thing I said is, I'm so glad to see you. I've had a bad day. And the joy and the mercy that I am receiving by you being present, I am undeserving. And it was a bad day. I was not in a good headspace that day. But as soon as they walked in and there they were, God's mercy is present.
It is,
and they need to know that they are the vessel for that.
Yes.
For people like us who they think we know it all and have our act together.
Yeah, 100%.
And we have bad days.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that was the thing in sharing, my experience. It was in sharing a reconciliation where I was confessing my struggle with the church at a time where we had the first scandal, and Joliet, you were there, Sarah. The bishop was saying things in the paper that I'm like, oh, could he please stop talking, kind of thing. And in the midst of sharing this with parents, wow, the walls just came down, and I just said it was one of those times where the priest, kind of held my hands in his and said, just tell me what's on your heart. And that's when I said that to them. I'd never talked about the experience out loud. I just started bawling. And so they saw that vomit, and it's huge. Every place I've ever been where you have a minister who's willing to be vulnerable, to share, even like you said, Sarah, for children to understand that they are the vessel of healing for us, of mercy and love. It's huge. And we don't do that a lot. Too often we want to go in and present, the church's being in this, the church's teaching. And in doing so, we present a one kind of, dimension instead of a 3-dimensional kind of world for them. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so much I'm writing down and taking notes. I'm on the second page already.
Same. And I just want to say it like really, I want to kind of point to it specifically. We keep on saying about like validating everybody and having them know, but like, I think it's specifically to point at the things that they can't see that they are actually doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so Sarah, whenever you said to them, like, you guys, your joy and your mercy towards me this evening is so helpful. And whenever we say to parents, you know, like, you of course are sacrificing everything to make sure that these kids have roofs over their heads and clothes on their back and food in their bellies, and that they're getting a good education, and that they're, you know, that they're learning how to be good citizens in the world. And I say that to them too, like how you treat your neighbor and the way that you act in the parking lot, like all of those little things that you do also, and is showing God's love towards other, and how we teach them what that needs to be. So then I feel like when you go from those initial affirmations, and then you can take it a step further and then say, and I think you could also, you know what I mean? And so then they like, they're like, oh, I'm already doing this stuff. Look at me. I'm so great. And then you're like, yeah, and you can do this stuff too. And then, you know, and
then they're just building upon what they already have.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
Whether it's rituals or whatever they have, they're just affirm to them they're doing it. I tell religious educators everywhere, the parents are in front of us, however you're feeling about how they're practicing or what they say or do, whatever, they're being countercultural, just showing up. Like there aren't a bunch of peers. There aren't a bunch of peers around them saying, I can't believe you're not going to church on Sunday. I can't, you know, they don't have that. Instead, they have the whole world saying this doesn't matter, and they're still showing up. So we've got to affirm them for being there and saying, wow, we need you for this. We can't teach your children without your affirmation of us and this church. And so here, how do we partner together to do it best? Because if we still do an us and them in today's world, they're gone. They're just gone. We cannot shame parents into this anymore. We can't. Those days are over.
I'm holding it in, Sarah. I'm holding it in. She
Oh,
just
no, say it. Come on. Come on. Get it out on the table, Christy.
Just go, everybody go read Brene Brown. Okay.
Yeah. Shame doesn't do us any good.
No, it doesn't. It actually locks people up and moves them away. And it's exactly this thing that we're talking about being vulnerable with the families. Even Sarah, for somebody that doesn't have kids, to say, I don't have kids. I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, what in the world do I have to say? But guys, I see you, and I see you doing this, and I see you doing that. Like, I mean, the facts are still like validating folks for doing the things well, that, you know, are living into the values of the church. We've got to call it out and be really specific. And then we also have to connect the parents to, what does this matter in their life, or why, you know, why would I do any of these things? But to that end, I mean, I feel like, Denise, we're all nodding heads here in this room, but how do we help those that are like obsessed with the books and the classroom, and we've done it this way? How do we transform those minds?
So that's one of the things why I still go around speaking on this, because, you know, after a dozen or so years, you're like, how are we still not getting? Well, I don't want to say thank God for the pandemic because of certain things, that the losses that we did suffer, but the ingenuity and the innovation and things that we saw, I'm grateful that people finally went, okay, wait a minute. There are still people that immediately wanted to go back. And for that, when I go in and talk, it is one of the things that gets people is I show this circle on this slide with this one little line from the middle of it to the edge. And that little sliver is the time we have with the kids in 1 year. It is 3/1000ths of their year. That is the time. If you do the average 30 hours of faith formation in a year, that one little sliver is how much time we have with them. Right. What kind of an impact can we make on their faith formation, on their spiritual lives? And I'm not saying it can't at all, because some people share their faith and a child out of those 30 in the classroom, whatever, is moved. But primarily, that one little sliver is not enough to transform children into disciples. If we partner with their parents, that goes up exponentially, because then their exposure to the rituals, to prayer, to all of the ways that Jesus lived takes up so much more of that pie that we can begin to see that transformation.
Yeah.
But without partnering, it's impossible. So you can use the books. If you still want to use books, you can use the books. But you better do it in a way that you're also engaging parents and having them have conversations at home and practice rituals at home, and that you're helping parents connect and share with each other so they have that space to learn and grow and connect it to how they're going to live in the community. Because most parishes, a dozen or so years ago, who were using a book, the kids were coming and doing the book, doing the homework, taking a test. You might have a mass once a month that was a family mass or so, but there was no other way that you were really connecting it across the community. And that today, as we've seen people leaving and leaving and leaving, read any of Christian Smith's work, read any of the work coming out from, Barna and Pew and Search Institute, and we are climbing an uphill climb here, a battle where, I don't want to talk politics. I don't want to really relate, but if you look at in this election, how everybody keeps saying, well, wow, nobody expected this. The polls all said this, but Gen Z came out, That same thing, if we're not listening to our kids in church and our church keeps getting older and kids keep walking away, we're missing making disciples of an entire generation, 2, 3, because they're being influenced by somebody and it's not by us.
Yeah.
Not paying attention. And so I think for too long, we've all listened and I think the wisdom of the elders in our community are huge, and we need to include them in this integrated kind of faith. But I think we can't only listen to those voices because the young have so much to teach us too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just said that recently at a meeting that I was in, is that the blank space these days is from 30 to 60. In that age range, there's where your families are, and those people are bringing their kids to faith formation and getting them sacramentalized, but they're not part of the life of the church. And by and large, me as a DRE, what I hear from these folks is, well, I don't want to come because my kids are bad. We come late. This is going on. I get the dirty looks. We don't know where to sit, and I know that coming off the pandemic, I'm sorry, everybody in parishes, get your ushers back to work, because folks need the assistance and they need the assurance that we're not here to judge and shame anybody. We're here to love you and worship together. And we're so, I say this to parents when they come through the door, and they're haggard and they're like, oh, and I'm like, hey, we have shoes on and we have clothes. We're dressed. That's all I need.
You did it.
We're good.
They're dressed without shoes and you got here.
Hashtag winning.
Exactly. Hashtag winning. 100%.
And they immediately laugh. And then they're put at ease.
You see the shoulders come down.
Bring it down. Because they're just, I know that's what else too. I tell them that around reconciliation, the world is telling you that you've got to be up here and perfect. And but how can we as the church be countercultural? And when I look at the stories of Jesus, I just constantly hear he was like, no, come here. No, come here. That's not, you don't have to be like that. Come here. I love you. And you've got this much, let's take it further. And I feel like when we're talking about the talents and all of that stuff, grow the individuals in front of you, right?
I feel like, you talk about looking to the gospel and you see Jesus doing that. And we have this Pope who keeps saying the same thing. Okay, you're divorced. That's okay. Come on in. Okay, you're not living it the way, come on in, mercy and love and just seeing the dignity of the person in front of you. And too often we go back to that. Okay, they're not behaving. They're not, living the way they should be if they're truly a Catholic, and if we continue to do that, people just feel so much shame. They walk away. They just walk away. It's hard. And we have to acknowledge this is hard, just getting your child up in the morning and let alone dressed with shoes on in there.
Well, and spoiler alert for the Dr. Timon Davis podcast is that she was saying about how if we don't have any concept of a living God, then we don't, and an active God, then we don't have any reason for our behavior to change. And the only way that people are going to see a living and active God is when the people of God that they recognize, like the DRE, the youth minister, the pastor, are those conduits of love and acceptance and affirmation, right? I mean, that's how they're going to see. And when we say that overtly, the Holy Spirit moved me to see in you, joy and mercy and love, so.
Yeah, because imagine being that parent who feels none of that and feels like I'm not getting it right and I'm not doing this. And yet you come and you affirm in them something you see that is that dignity, that child of God. And wow, what a difference that can make and whether or not they're going to show up next time,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's huge.
Oh, so
I
We
like
have a
that
lot of work
too.
to do.
Here's the thing though, as a ministry leader, that takes a weight off of my shoulders as well, because then I don't feel like I have to do everything perfect, top notch, over the top, 10.10. I feel like it's okay for me to come in on a bad day, and not be 100%. And that's okay. That really kind of lifts a weight for me to, okay, didn't double check the calendar and the blood drive is in there until 2 minutes before I'm supposed to have 100 people in that space. Oops. You know what I mean? Like
exactly. We worry about so many of those kind of things.
Yeah.
I had a presentation in the Archdiocese of New York earlier this year. And there was, after I was done speaking, this panel of ministers, a parent from a parish, etc. And this father spoke and said, being at my parish that was focused on family and changed our lives. He goes, I grew up in a church in the Midwest that I never felt good enough, never felt like I belonged, never felt like the church was where I live. I moved to this place. It was amazing. And I just had to stop and I'm like, tell me what they're doing with parents that is so transformational. He goes, they don't program us. The parents meet and the parents run it. So while the kids are meeting, the parents gather. He goes, and we do the same thing every single week, the same question. How are you today? No, really. He goes, that's it. And it opens up, and the conversation always leads us to where God's working in our life. Like you see from real life struggles and real life celebrations, what's happening. And I immediately was like, boom, I'm going to be sharing that with everybody. And I included it in the book because I'm like, wow, we make it so hard. Like, what do I do with parents? And how do I program for them? And what should I be teaching them? And what things do they need? It doesn't have to, we just need to give them space to be together and talk about raising their children. And what are their children teaching them about faith and God and life and love? And how has that impacted them? I say our kids are often our greatest spiritual directors because we might have a spiritual, but the kid's going to move us to something that like, oh, bam, like, how did I not connect that? And so just giving them space. And this dad, I'm like, holy moly, bam.
That's great.
Yeah. We worry about logistics and programming and details in this, that sometimes we need to let the Holy Spirit in, I'm not saying don't do the programming, but I'm saying it doesn't have to, if you're doing it all by yourself, you don't have to do that and this and this. Parents can handle that. So yeah.
How are you doing today? Really? How are you really doing today?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for us to say, fine, I'm good. It's all good. Hanging in there. It's all fine.
And he said, all of those things of life come up. All of the stuff that you're doing comes up. And in that, God is there. It's just simple.
Yeah.
I'm like,
can I just say this though, too, as another just like doorway sort of a situation is when you get used to seeing the families and whatnot, when I've laughed my head off because everyone's always like, why are you always at the door? And I'm like, well, my dad was a pilot, so I wanted to be a flight attendant. So it's always been my dream to greet people coming in and saying goodbye as they go out. But I know that sounds so goofy, but it's actually a great way to start to recognize the faces and you get a feel for people's demeanor. And what I have started to say to people is whenever I say, how are you? And the tone comes back like, fine. And I say, are you sure?
Yeah.
And then they look at me because then they're like, am I going to unpack with you or am I not? And then I sit and then they kind of give me this look like, what? And then I'll say to them, do you want to talk about it? And give them that, like, I could be a safe place for you, all because that's the other thing. They're
Mhm.
so worried about being judged
Yeah.
by us, the parish leaders, that I bring that up because Denise, I had a kind of a similar background story of the mishmash and whatnot. And I just always say, I remember clear as it was yesterday, the trepidation, the dread that I had to
Yeah.
go in and talk to, and it wasn't even just any old church lady, it was a freaking nun. So
Yeah.
I was really like, oh, yeah. And I was at a table one time at a meeting with a bunch of parish catechetical leaders, and they were sort of like, why can't parishes just get on board and do all the stuff that they're supposed to do? Da, 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 da. And then I had to tell them, because God moved me to, and I told them so, to say, I am that loser. I'm the loser parent that can't get her act together and do all the things the right way. And they were like,
Mhm.
oh, no, you're not. And I was like, no, I was. And that's what
Yeah.
I brought. That's what these folks are bringing to
Mhm.
the table. And if we could please
Yeah.
just see that it's like the spider. They're more afraid of you than you are of them, actually.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
give them that space and grace to see you and to see them as in the humanity part of it. That's incarnational, living. I think that's, guys.
100%. And when you say that, I think back to, I told you a little bit about my dad, but my mom wasn't Catholic then. She is now. But in the midst of growing up, I remember she loved the Psalms, and I just didn't get it because that wasn't stories. But as you go into things about how you need, in the midst of troubling times or in the midst of there's so much there that it expresses.
Yeah.
And I just remember learning, so much from these two different personalities of faith, and then watching my mom as I was in high school begin RCIA. And I think my family from the outside would have completely looked like they don't do it the way it should be done. They don't go every single week the way, it just would have been until we did. But we did because of the relationship stuff, the outreach that we experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And dang, if that isn't a lesson for those who are doing the blaming, and this person's divorced and this person's this. Well, okay, let's be mercy then. Let's show some mercy about what God's love looks like for them now. Let's not Jesus would not have dismissed them. I think about how we want sometimes for it to look like a club of the people that are all the same. And we're not a club. We're supposed to be missionary, as we talked about, and spreading that love. So yeah. I think you're right on to tell people, I'm not perfect. Are you perfect? Okay, let's move on from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How are we on time, Sarah? Because I have so many more questions.
Oh no, we're right up on the edge there. I was just going to ask the key question at the end of our podcast, which, Denise, the question is, what do you wish you knew when you started out in ministry?
Oh, what do I wish I knew? It's funny because I knew next to nothing. So, I told you, the pastor asked me, and I was a teacher. I'd been a youth minister, a little bit, just, volunteering. But he said, you get it. And I think you're a bridge between people, and that's what I need. And are you willing to go to classes? Are you willing to? And I was just a sponge at the time. So, I'd gone to these trainings, I'd gone to this. I don't know that I would change any of it because I think sometimes when you know it all ahead of time, you just go through with what you think. I had to just pay attention and be open and learn as we went. So, part of it, you'll see in the book how I share some of the church documents. Part of it was, as we were growing, our board began reading, our hearts were burning within us and realizing, oh my gosh, the church has been telling us the adults are supposed to be the focus for over 10 years. What are we doing? And then we did, Pope Francis's Joy of the Gospel, and just my mind was constantly opening more and more. And so I don't think I would change that. What do I wish I would have known? I wish I would have known I was doing okay. And that I whatever I did, to not worry about, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're still in there and I need to be in there in 5 minutes, because so many of those stresses that, I wish I just would have opened up to it's okay more, instead of worrying about everything being just right, and just trusting the Spirit in the midst of all of that. Because I think there's so much in just hearing one another and trusting that. The knowledge came through the lessons with the people. The people taught me more than anything else, but then also, you know, getting my master's in the midst of that, I learned so much from the people who I sat at their feet. You know, CTU, we just lost Father Dunn Sr. this last week. And
that's right.
oh, he was such, you know, I sat at his feet about St. Paul, and I learned more just that journey, you know, and Sister Diane Brigant and Sister, I mean, just, you know, the Father Jerome. I mean, there were just so many things that I learned that I couldn't pick one thing. Just, I think I was supposed to do it the way I did, just learning more and more and figuring it out as I went and just being open. Because, yeah, I knew nothing.
Yeah. And the more I learned, the more I realized I knew nothing.
Exactly.
You know what I
100%.
mean? Like, how did I even get through those early years?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, Denise, we are just delighted to have you on our podcast today. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. Everyone, Denise's newest book is Engage Every Family, a Parish Guide to Integrated Faith Formation, and that's with 23rd Publications. So run out and get that book today. And also just check out Denise's many, many writings and her work with Lifelong Faith and John Roberto. If you haven't listened to that one, please go back and listen to the John Roberto and the Timon Davis podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, we're
together.
all connecting, you know, we're all connecting what we're doing, and the Spirit is really moving in our ministries these days. So pay attention, folks. What we wish we knew. Pay attention.
I also
keep
want to just put in, we did with the book do a website, familieslivingfaith.org, or no, .com, sorry. I might have put it .org because I'm used to vibrantfaith.org. familieslivingfaith.com.
Okay.
It's live now, but there'll be a big launch at Advent. So familieslivingfaith.com, and in there we'll begin sharing ideas to work with parents, but also for parents. So it'll be there'll be parent stuff and leader stuff. So yeah.
Wonderful.
It's great. You guys go check it out. It really is. I looked at it yesterday. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you.
Quick, Sarah,
Christy.
Happy Veterans Day to all of the veterans out there. Thank you for your service and your sacrifices.
Yes, Christy, thank you for your service.
Oh,
and
you're
Denise,
welcome.
Thank you for your service as a spouse and mother.
Thank you.
All of you out there, my father, my sister, my brother-in-law, my father-in-law, and of course, all my grandparents. So thank you all for your service. You do what I cannot, what I was not called to do. So thank you for the freedoms that we have. Have a wonderful day, everyone. We're probably going to be taking a little bit of time off for the holidays. So we'll catch you after the holidays. Take care, everyone.
Peace.
Peace.